Good morning, everybody. This is Ann Swain, CEO for APSCo. We had a very good question time live session on Friday and decided to repeat the opportunity for people to ask questions across the board to a new panel of members and specialists in their fields to give you an opportunity to ask more questions. There will also be another one of these sessions on Friday. So welcome in and welcome to my panel. I have Tania Bowers, who is the legal counsel for APSCo. I have John Cox, who is the recruitment director of CCL Global, which is a specialist energy recruitment company looking at professional, technical and commercial people in the energy market. And I also have Stuart Hutchison, who is a partner of UHY Hacker Young, that is a national accountancy firm with 22 offices in the UK and also covering professional services from that point of view with consultancy. Welcome to my panel. I hope everybody's in this morning.
Hello,
now,
good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, why don't we go straight to questions? And they're coming in at the moment, but what I would say is, don't leave it to the last minute to ask your question. If you're a member of the audience, you should be able to put those up, and we will endeavour in this hour to get through as many as we possibly can. If your question is pretty much the same as somebody else's, bear with me. I'll merge the two just to make sure we can cover as many subjects as we can. The first question we've got is an interesting one, slightly different to a number of the questions that we have on Friday and pretty specific, but it's from a member that are working in a WeWork office scenario. And actually we have a lot of APSCo members, and there are a lot of recruitment companies out there that are based in a WeWork or in another service office scenario. What they said is, we work in a WeWork due to our office being 3 meters squared with 7 employees, and therefore with government guidelines on social distancing, we are unable to work in that office. WeWork are still charging full rent for this. Is there anything that we can do? Tania, can I go to you?
Yes, Anne, I can certainly point you in the right direction, I hope. With property issues, as with most commercial issues, you need first to go to the terms of your contract with WeWork and see if they're potentially in breach of the contract they've agreed with you. I have found a Bloomberg article that suggested that WeWork is being, because it may already have other financial problems because of overexpansion, it's being very aggressive in this situation and is and they're refusing to close offices unless they're absolutely required to by the government, or release customers from lease agreements without penalty. So I would suggest that your situation is to argue breach of contract, because actually because of the government social distances guidelines, it's actually impossible for you to work in that office, and they're not providing you with facilities that enable you to work in that office. I appreciate that's not particularly helpful in the short term, and if you are going to take legal action, then you're going to need to instruct a lawyer or take the advice of a lawyer. And obviously we have legal affiliates, all of whom would be able to assist you. The other thing is, there is some assistance from government if you're unable to afford your rent, which I don't think is the issue here, but that's a question of affordability of rent. And if you're in a position where you can't afford the rent, then there is possibly some government assistance.
Okay, thank you for that. Helps. Yeah, let's hope it does help. It seems unfair if the guidelines are saying 2 meter distance and that's not possible, which must be the case in a number of the WeWork those and other offices in a similar vein. Thank you, Tania, for that. Let me go to our next question. What's been the general response of members to the position that agency workers can be furloughed? Is it too early to tell if clients are asking for this, or indeed are agencies or MSPs asking clients to consider this as a way of presenting the release of agency workers? Do we have a flavour, Tania, for this out there in the marketplace? And then I'm going to come to John.
I think in the sectors we're in, I'm getting more contact about this, probably from our larger MSP members who may well have actually started to run pretty large agency payrolls because of the changes to IR35 that were going to come into force in April that have now been delayed for a year. I'm not really getting a sense yet as to who would be expected to pay for the furlough pending the reimbursement. I do think it's quite a technical issue to expect the client to effectively front the furlough payment ahead of getting the reimbursement.
Fair enough.
So,
John, do you have a view with this, John, at all?
But I think we've generally been very impressed at CCL with our clients who have moved contractors to work from home arrangements such that we haven't had a drop off. And I think pointing out proactively to the client that they could furlough the PA workers that we've got on is beyond our duty in a way. The information's out there for them to perceive that they could furlough their workers if they wanted to. But if they did do that, the way I read it is that we could put those PA workers through the furlough scheme and keep the contracts going and save the clients having to front them. So yeah. I think it's a reactive thing, but we're ready if the client comes to us to ask us if that's possible.
And is there any time that you would envisage that you would be proactive to ask customers that you've got good relationships with to do that?
Certainly, yeah. We've taken a view that if the client suggested that they were going to release the contractor or put them on a moratorium such that they couldn't work from home, is that then we would be proactive and propose that to them for the benefit of the contractor.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question has come in. I'm going to tag it into this one as to whether we have any visibility as to the timing of reimbursement, and do we think that there will be extra hoops for agencies or MSPs to jump through to actually get those reimbursements? Tania.
I don't have any sort of government supplied information about when the portal's likely to go on stream. Everyone seems to be talking about 4-6 weeks. Stuart or John may have some other intel. I don't think there will be extra hoops, particularly for recruiters to jump through or umbrellas to jump through, as long as there is a payroll, but it's hard to tell at the moment.
Stuart, do you have a view as to whether there's likely to be any hoops or any idea of a time frame of reimbursement?
In terms of hoops, I tend to agree with Tania. I can't see that there are going to be any hoops that MSPs are going to have to jump through any different to any other organisation. In terms of the timing of payments, the portal is not live as yet. From what I understand, it will be the end of April if we're lucky, which obviously causes many businesses a cash flow issue in the short term.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But essentially, that's why they've offered the the VAT holiday, to allow businesses to use that cash to pay their staff until they are reimbursed in 2 or 3 months' time, potentially.
Yeah, John, can I come to you as somebody running a business? What are you doing about making sure you can cash flow the business if there are quite some delays with regard to receiving any help?
Well, I think that there have been a lot of difficulties with the business interruption scheme. Most people that I speak to have been to their bank have found that to be extremely arduous with guarantees required. So I think it is a case of tightening the belt. If I can just come back to your point about the hoops, I have read that or heard that the government stopped using that phrase, cannot afford to pay. And so I think that everybody who does put people through furlough will be eligible. And so the decision really comes down to whether or not the staff that you've got can continue to do valuable work. And if they can't, if you were in retail or something, there wouldn't be much point in continuing them, and that would be a cost saving. But if they can do valuable work, then they should carry on. So I just think it's about normal cash flow management and probably not hold out too much for that business interruption scheme.
Yeah. Okay. My next question, and just to let you know, we have 130 people listening here, and I'm hoping that a fair proportion of those will make sure that we have questions from them. The next question, how will umbrella companies calculate the salary that they will furlough? Tania, may I come to you?
This is actually a really difficult one for umbrella companies that they're considering. For recruiters whose contractors are working through umbrella companies, the usual contractual arrangement they have with the umbrella is that they get paid a basic salary, which is pretty low, quite possibly as low as the national living wage, and they get the rest of their pay put through payroll, but once it's been paid by the recruiter. So it really depends how in their contract of employment that is worded, and whether it is a bonus or commission, which is excluded from the scheme, or whether there's an argument that umbrella workers receive variable pay and therefore the calculation could be made on an average of earnings rather than just basic salary. I'm afraid I don't have the definitive answer. We have put the question to BEIS. I think BEIS and employment agency standards see umbrella workers as potentially vulnerable. So I suspect they wouldn't want them to lose out because of a technicality. But on the other hand, ultimately, it will be for each umbrella company to make a decision on how it deals with furlough.
Do we expect further guidance anytime soon, or do we feel that BEIS have given all the guidance, that they're going to give on this?
The sense I get from EAS is that Treasury, HM Treasury and HMRC, who actually run this scheme, are reticent about issuing guidance to deal with every eventuality and every possibility. We've worked out that there are certain things that aren't clear from the guidance as published, and we fed that back, but they're not making any promises that there will be any greater detailed guidance anytime soon.
Okay, another question. How many of the employees on an umbrella company payroll are eligible for furlough? Do we have a view on this, Tania?
This is another really tricky question that also applies to agencies, recruiters working an agency payroll, because obviously a lot of umbrella workers may be technically employed by the umbrella company but not be on assignment as of the 28th of February. Likewise, agency workers could be on a recruiter's agency payroll on a contract for services but not be on assignment on the 28th of February. So are they eligible for furlough? The guidance doesn't give an answer. The closest analogy is it says if an employee was on unpaid leave on the 28th of February, they're not eligible for furlough. But obviously that's not quite the same. So again, we've fed this back to employment agency standards. They've fed it up to HMRC and Treasury. And we're hoping to get a bit more clarity on it from government.
Okay, thank you. I might need to come to you again, but a different question. We do understand there's been some mootings from the Home Office about changing the right to work checks to open things up a bit. Has that happened as yet, Tania?
Yes, I definitely did want to cover this today. It was published on 30th of March and it was sent to us by Employment Agency Standards this morning. Home Office have relaxed the right to work checks temporarily as of 30th March. You can ask a worker to submit a scanned copy or a photo of their original documents via email or using a mobile app. You can then arrange a video call with a worker and ask them to hold the original documents to the camera and check them against the digital copy. You should record the date you made the check and mark it as adjusted check undertaken on X date due to COVID-19. And you can continue to use the online check-in service for people with a biometric permit. After the COVID-19 measures have ended, though, you do have to carry out retrospective checks on these employees or workers who started working for you during these measures, and a follow-up right to work is required. But what this does mean is that for our Compliance Plus members and for those working in finance and banking and healthcare and any other sectors and with clients that require full statutory right to work checks, and of course for your own employees, then you are able to do this moderated process as of now, and then the guidance will be up on the website, I'm sure, on gov.uk today, and we're circulating it.
Okay, great. I've been asked a different kind of question, really. This is from an education recruitment member, and what they've said is that they're thinking of using this time to research and start a new sector for when they come back. Any ideas of which of the markets out there, John, to you, which are the markets out there that are booming? I mean, how's that energy market of yours?
Well, one good thing about the energy market is that a lot of it's outside the UK, so the sterling price makes it more attractive. But I have to say that I saw an article last night that the US has got 10% of the energy vacancies that it had a month ago. So I don't know if that really is a good market to go for. MC sent out some stats yesterday that the things that you might expect that are busy at the moment are science, medical, distribution, all of those sorts of things. I think
pharmaceutical?
Sorry, that's what I meant by science. I think, however, and you said you saw a film on when we had the last Friday. I saw the Peter Rabbit film the other day, and there was that deer that was crossing the road and that had headlights flashed inside of it on its eyes, and it was stuck. And I think we probably want to take a bit of a longer view that we will be out of this in 8-12 weeks. And so you probably wouldn't be designing a new business strategy based on COVID. You'd be designing it based on the same thing you're going to do 6 months ago. So look at your core strengths and markets that you would go for rather than a knee-jerk. But I do think generally, to your point, what can recruitment businesses be doing now? And I think hunting for spot vacancies is a very expensive needle in a haystack at the moment. But isn't this a period when we've all been extremely fast for years? We can take a bit of do some of those tasks that we have had to put off For example, you were talking, Tania, about the EAS, the key information document is meant to come out tomorrow. There are projects that people can be doing that are very valuable. When was the last time you reviewed your GDPR? So I do think that there are good work that agencies can be doing, and particularly staying in touch with your clients and talking about their long-term hiring plans. If you think that a campaign is 3 months, that all that work can still be done. So talk to them about how they're going to bounce back and what projects they've slowed down on and will need to ramp up. If you think that there are hundreds of thousands of people whose jobs will be displaced, and I'm not proposing profiteering, but there are hundreds of thousands of people whose jobs will be displaced. They will all need rehiring in 3 to 6 months' time. So I think stay in touch with your clients is what I would say.
Okay, good advice there, I think. I've had a question here. Is there any clarity on whether the apprenticeship levy costs can be recovered? Stuart, I don't know if you have a view on this.
Initially, and as I still understand, the guidance was silent on the apprenticeship levy. Unless Tania knows any different to me, it's still silent. I've not heard anything different, and the apprenticeship levy remains. Tania?
No, I haven't heard anything different. So I think the assumption has to be the levy remains.
Okay.
Okay. Let me ask another question. Can you ask furloughed employees to take annual leave during their furlough period? Tania?
Yeah, I did read a question answered by somebody else on this yesterday. I think the answer is yes, you can require employees on furlough to take annual leave during furlough, as long as you don't breach employment regulations. And the employment regulation is that you need to give twice as much notice as the holiday that's being taken. So if you want a worker to take 5 days, you've got to give them 10 days notice. However, during this period, you will have to pay them full pay. Well, my view is you will need to pay full pay. You will need to top up to the full pay during the leave period. So I'm not sure it's that advantageous. There was an announcement, I think on Monday or Friday, probably Monday, actually it was Friday, that said yes, annual leave does continue to accrue during furlough, but that employees will have a further 2 leave years in which to take accrued holiday, meaning that employers won't have a sudden mountain of holiday applications to process once things get back to normal.
Thank you. We're all aware, and I'm sure that all of our members out there are aware, that if a member of staff is furloughed, they are not allowed to be doing work on your behalf. I've had a question. What happens if clients call furloughed workers on their mobile phones to chat? Is that okay? John, do you have a view on this?
I have read that if recruiters off their own bat continue to network, for example, on LinkedIn, it's their own private LinkedIn account. I think this probably extends to your point about a mobile phone. If it's their own mobile phone, if they continue to network, and I don't really see that would be a problem. However, I think it is very clear, the guidance, that furloughed workers should be instructed by the company that they should not work, and that any alternative to that is fraud. It's also not particularly in the national effort that's going on, and and instructing a worker to work when they're furloughed would be a criminal offence. So I think you've got to be very, very careful about how you encourage or discourage that. I think that turning off and redirecting their emails is something that you probably ought to be doing if you're furloughing workers, but I don't really see how you can stop a client or a contractor calling a recruiter who's on furlough. But I also don't think that recruiter should probably be making outbound calls to clients or candidates when they're furloughed. I think that you would be at very risk, and you'd also have the risk, of course, if you instructed them, if things go very sour, that they make a call to HMRC in 3 months' time and say that they were instructed to work when they were furloughed, and you might have to give all the money back to HMRC. So I think be very careful about that.
Tania, I think we're in agreement with that, aren't we? Or is there anything else we need to know legally?
No, I think John summarised it very well, thanks.
Okay, well done. Now, a question: can employees challenge a decision to be furloughed? Can they challenge that decision legally, Tania?
Yes, potentially, because unless you have a contractual right to furlough, which, let's be honest, you're not going to have, then it does require a variation to their contract of employment. So I suppose there's the initial objection, which could be, why am I being furloughed and not my colleague over there? And why am I being furloughed when I could be doing X, Y, and Z? And I think, you need to give due consideration to that sort of pushback and discussion. That's what a consultation is. And you might well change your mind. However, if you decide to proceed with the furlough, then it is quite difficult if they're going to completely object to it. I think if communicated properly, it's quite unlikely, because this is a very unusual situation, and I can't see why employers would want to risk their job at this time. But ultimately, I guess the same rules would apply as when you are negotiating a change to your contract of employment anyway. Ultimately, if they won't agree to the variation and you're refusing to budge about the furlough, then potentially you could be giving them notice terminating their contract. This potentially could put you at risk of an unfair dismissal, so it's certainly not something to be undertaken lightly. There's also the alternative of considering statutory redundancy, but the role's not necessarily redundant. You just want to put them on furlough, and obviously redundancy does carry a cost because there's a notice period and there may be statutory redundancy expenses as well. So it is a difficult situation, and therefore communication is absolutely key to getting it right.
Okay, good answer. Thank you for that. Another question: can an umbrella company charge the agency worker an admin fee to process furlough payments? Stuart, do you have a view on this?
I think actually this is probably again another question for Tania. Probably depends upon the contract.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Umbrella companies aren't as of yet regulated by employment agency standards, and they're not regulated by the conduct regulations. I think under the conduct regulations, I think an agency would be taking a risk of charging for work finding services if they charged a fee, potentially. An umbrella company, it's a contract of employment. There probably is more flexibility there, but I agree with Stuart, it is a contractual issue.
Okay, a question here: if you are, and I think I know the answer to this, but if you are topping up the salaries of people that are furloughed, are they able to work the hours that you are paying for? Tania?
No.
I thought that might be a
can't-
one-word answer.
Yeah, you can't, that would effectively be short-term working. Effectively, no, you can't top up and expect them to work a few hours. The only thing you can do is instruct them to undertake training, and then you do have to pay them for any hours they're engaged undertaking training.
Aha. Okay.
Can I ask a clarification on that, Anne?
Yes, go for it, John.
So I believe that the minimum period is 3 weeks, Tania, for furloughing. So
Yes.
you might, and you can on-off people, but are you saying that you cannot part work? So for example, you couldn't ask someone to work 3 out of 5 days during that time, rather it's 3 weeks on and then maybe rotate to someone else and review it. So part working, I don't think that's possible, is it?
No, part working's not possible. There's
Thanks.
nothing prohibiting a sort of on-off system of 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, although I don't think that's in the spirit of the government's intentions. So I couldn't say what the situation would be on the reimbursement 100%, but on the face of it, the only thing they say is a furlough has to be at least 3 weeks per period.
So you could have a red team and a blue team, maybe red furloughed in April and blue team furloughed in May or something like that?
Potentially.
Okay.
I mean, that doesn't seem to be an issue if, say, the red team, blue team scenario is there. I wonder if it would get more complicated if the red team come back on in June and the blue team back on in July.
There's always winners and losers.
Yeah, Tania, what do you think? I mean, if you're having half of your team, half of the team furloughed for 1 month, surely you could switch them back on and have the other half of the team furloughed for the following month.
There doesn't seem to be anything prohibiting it. I'm not recommending it. Furlough's only advantageous as long as the scheme exists. At the moment, it's March, April, May. It's running through to the end of May. It may or may not be extended. Yeah.
Okay, let me get on to the next question. There seems to be varying opinions as to whether holiday entitlement, we've covered some of this, accrues during a period of furlough, and also whether any holiday taken in this time is paid at 80% or 100%. We did cover it briefly. Can you just clarify it one more time, Tania?
Yes, this was confusing initially. Certainly on Friday, there was no one was quite, well, not everyone, including me, was quite sure about the position about holiday, and some of the earlier documents uploaded onto APSCo may have suggested you had a choice. By Friday afternoon, it was very clear that holiday does continue to accrue during furlough, and that applies to agency workers as well. They've got worker rights. It's statutory. Potentially it's only statutory that continues to accrue, but that would again require a contract variation. And as I said earlier, you could make people take holiday during furlough, but you would have to effectively pay them their normal pay during that holiday period. So it would cost you a little bit more money.
Okay, this is a good question. Can we top up some furloughed staff and not others? Tania, I'll come to you again. Sorry, I keep coming to you.
That's okay. Effectively, each furlough is an individual variation of a person's contract. So obviously you've got to comply with normal rules around discrimination, etc. But on the face of it, I don't see why you couldn't treat different groups of people differently and top some people up and not others. as long as you applied objective criteria for your reasons for doing so and recorded and wrote them down.
So, for instance, where one would expect recruitment consultants, sales staff, in essence, to be earning commission normally, if you furloughed them, you might decide that you want to top up their base salary to be 100%, whereas administrative staff, you might decide to let them be covered on the 80%, and there wouldn't be any legal boundaries to doing that.
You've just got to be careful about your commission policy, because what you wouldn't want to do was top up someone's pay, in quote marks, on the basis that it was sort of compensating them for lost commission, and then for the individual to claim backdated commission against you later. So you do
Right.
have to think about what you're doing with your commission policy. Is it contractual? If it's contractual, you need to cover it off in the variation of employment document. If it's non-contractual, then I still think you need to issue an update to your commission policy to make clear what changes you're making to the policy, for how long and why. For example, you could change commission to pay when paid, for example, or it could be that commission is paid on deals that were introduced before the furlough date, but there's no commission due on deals coming through after. I mean, again, these are quite complicated. You might want to take specific legal advice on your own circumstances, but yeah, you do need to think about your commission policy.
Tania, if I can add to that, I think changing the commission scheme is certainly something that we're looking at strongly in terms of paid when paid. You were asking earlier about cash flow, and I think that's a dead cert. So paid when paid, but also lag it back to when the furlough ends, lag it back to after all of this, and that way it doesn't interfere with any of the 80% calculations or the furlough calculations. In other words, push it back to after this.
Yeah, well, the reality is no bonuses or commissions are included in that furlough amount anyway. So putting it afterwards seems a much better bet.
Yeah, so the definition is, when is commission earned? Is it earned on the date the candidate starts, or is it earned when the client pays? And if you just design the commission to be paid at some point that we predict it's all business as usual, that's you can define when commission is paid fairly easily, I think, to be later.
Yeah, and that would not be contractual, would
Exactly.
it? That would just, yeah, it's definitely out of contract. What I would say is, although I agree with you that now is not the time for looking at new markets to go into, you can see that the HR market and the legal market is probably buzzing at the moment with so much advice needed to advise staff and advise companies on what they can and cannot do. So it's an interesting time, but I agree with John, don't look at new markets, just that we can look for the future, but don't move anything quickly. But boy, oh boy, the HR market and the legal market are buzzing. Okay, a question here. Is it possible for directors to rotate furlough? Tania.
That is a very difficult one, because they have statutory duties. I guess as long as there's one director still responsible, potentially. I don't know, Stuart or John, whether you've given any advice or done any research on this point.
The only thing I've read, Tania, is that directors can't really be furloughed because of the fiduciary duties that you say. They are ongoing legal requirements that need to be done.
My understanding is slightly different. Where there are businesses with multiple directors, providing those directors are removed or those directors that are furloughed are removed from anything to do with the operations and the running of the business, and all they're left with is their statutory responsibilities, there is a possibility of furloughing some of those directors.
In other words, those fiduciary duties aren't considered as work in the job retention scheme. Okay.
It's not to do with the operations of the business, but there will always need to be at least one director running the business, unless the business itself is mothballed.
And that brings us on, which is slightly different to the PSC point, which if a one-man company wanted to rely on the job retention scheme, then effectively they would need to mothball the company. So one would imagine they'd need to speak to their accountant before they could apply that job retention scheme. Although, you know, in light of what Stuart's just said, I suppose they could potentially still retain their statutory director duties, even though the company itself isn't doing anything. Again, a tricky one. They probably need to take their accountant's advice.
I think it's harder for one-man bands. I think if a contractor's come to an end for a PSC, then they could potentially mothball a company quite easily because a contractor's come to an end. But the reality is most directors at that level are only paying themselves a basic salary anyway. And although there's still some benefit, the benefit is not as significant as it is for general employees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let me come to another question. This is regarding commission again, but it's a slightly different question. The job retention scheme obviously does not cover commissions and bonuses. However, whilst people are on furlough, are we obliged to pay them commission for roles placed before they went on furlough but wouldn't be paid until now? Do we have a view on that? John, would you be paying people whilst they're on furlough? I don't know if you've got anyone on furlough, but if you did have anybody on furlough, would you pay them commission on placements they placed beforehand, but the commission starts coming into effect now?
I mean, I think that comes to Tania's point about what their existing employment contract says. And if you were going to vary that, when you do the furlough, you would have to get their agreement that their employment contract changed, just as the way you have got to get their furlough agreement to be agreed. And if you were varying their commission scheme, for example, as you say, a deal that was done earlier in March or February that they were due to earn when the client paid in, say, early April, then you'd have to go to the contract. And where your point was about whether staff being furloughed would in good faith accept a furlough, or they would go down the route of saying, well, you're changing my terms so drastically that I don't want to accept it. I think you'd be on pretty tricky ground with sales staff to be removing the commission that they think they've earned, and you probably would get some pushback from that. They may not object so much to the furloughing, but I bet most recruiters would be miffed enough to not accept their commission. So I don't think that we would do that, but I do think you could push that back to be paid when the cash flow starts to come back again in we're hoping 1st of June, some sort of return to service. So
Tania, what's your view from a legal point of view?
It comes back to the point about whether the commission policy is contractual or not. If it's non-contractual, then your employment contract will say your commission, well, should say your commission policy is non-contractual and commission is paid at the director's absolute discretion. Now, we all know that there are limits to that absolute discretion, but on the face of it, if the commission policy is non-contractual and if the changes are objectively reasonable and proportionate to the situation, then I think you should be able to change your commission policy fairly low risk. And I tend to agree with John that the pay when paid option, unless you literally are counting every penny in your bank account, and therefore you need that money for cash flow, which is a bit of a different issue. But you know, for most businesses that are chugging along reasonably nicely, then the pay when paid option does seem the most proportionate response.
Okay, Stuart, do you have anything to add to that?
My feeling really is more think about the cultural aspects of the decisions the listeners are going to make. Obviously, there's potential here that a lot of key staff, key consultants are going to be furloughed, and you're going to want those people to come back to you when the market turns around, because it will turn around at some point in the future. And going down a route of removing or restricting their commission payments may not be in the best interest of the business in the future.
Yeah, look, it's great to hear an accountant talking about the people, and yeah, I agree with you. As long as you can afford to cash flow it, you should be doing that so that your individuals can cash flow themselves as well. Okay, let me just ask another question, if that's okay. Stuart, let me come to you. This says, my understanding is that you can advance request the grant for furlough for both PAYE and or staff. Is that your understanding? You can advance request that grant?
That's not something I've been made aware of. As far as I understand, you can only make a claim once the information has been uploaded through the portal, which we know is not live yet,
Yep.
at which point it goes through a process of review by the revenue before they pay out. So unless Tania or John are aware of anything that I'm not, that's news to me, that one.
Tania, do you, I hadn't heard about claiming ahead. Can you advance claim the grant?
No, I do wonder whether what they mean is that you can start furloughing someone now and the government will refund it in due course. So there is a sort of refund mechanism. But what the government has said is initially, if you're going to struggle to pay the furlough, then there are other schemes available, such as I think Stuart said earlier on, the VAT, time to pay other taxes. You can ask HMRC, a VAT holiday, the business interruption loan scheme, which frankly might not be that ideal because it seems quite difficult to process. But no, I haven't heard of any advance.
I'm just wondering if what they're really asking is if they are furloughing people, say for 2 months, April or May, that you get your claim in, but add May in it to say they're going to be furloughed for 2 months, but your claim gets in once the portal's open.
No, I mean, it will run just like payroll. So you won't be able to claim ahead, so to speak, because that's not how paying tax works. So
okay, let me ask another question. In terms of, sorry, John.
I just add to that. If it was Tania's point about when it happens, I think there has been some confusion about waiting for the portal to go live before sending out the letters and furloughing, and that isn't the case. I don't think you can backdate it before you did send out the letters or stop them working, but certainly 1 month of the 3 months already happened. So if you haven't done it yet, now is the time to do it.
Absolutely. Okay, let me ask this question. In terms of insurance, does the pandemic qualify as a legitimate reason to claim as a business interruption? Does anyone have a view on that? Stuart, do you have a view, or shall I go to Tania?
It depends on the insurance policy, I think, is the answer. There has been communication from the government which has said if your insurance policy covers these kind of events, then you should make a claim. But I think it's down to reviewing an individual insurance policy.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, another question. a suggestion from umbrellas is that if they have to pay furloughed workers, they will apply 80% of the minimum wage. Will this cause issues with workers? What's your view? Tania, do you have a view on that? Minimum wage, or does it need to be living wage?
I think it's the point that I made earlier about a lot of umbrella workers' contracts of employment state that their basic salary is the national living wage, or thereabouts. That is from the umbrella's perspective, that is the least risky approach to take. So I can see why an umbrella would choose to do that, although obviously it's not, it kind of disadvantages the worker. So that's why I've had a few conversations with some umbrellas where they're trying to work through this issue of how should they calculate the salary, as variable pay or on basic pay. But that's something I'm afraid, but well, it's between the employee worker and the umbrella company.
Stuart, can you just clarify your point you made earlier about it's actually based on the February pay, so decisions about what they get paid going forward, I don't think that's relevant, is it? It's based on, I think you said something about February and a previous period. Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, so if an employee's effectively on a salary, it's the salary as of the 28th of February that should be used to calculate the 80%. If the employee's pay is variable, then it's a slightly different calculation, which is to do with the earnings from the previous year or the average monthly earnings for the 19-20 tax year. So if something happens in March, April, May or beyond, effectively, my understanding is you revert back to the salary as of the 28th of February. Does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Let me come in on another question. Stuart, I'm directing this at you. What other support is out there for recruitment companies?
Okay, so Tania's already mentioned a handful of them. The big ones, obviously, the job retention scheme and the business interruption loan scheme, both which the problems are well documented. For the smaller businesses, there are grants available where you are qualifying for small business rates relief. There's extensions to the small business rates relief calculations, which may give you some leeway or some support. Obviously, there's time to pay arrangements. Payments on account can be deferred for the directors, the owners of the business, which will help, I suppose, kick a tax bill down the road, really. That's
there are a number of options.
It.
John, do you have any ideas of any other options that you've looked into as a business?
I haven't.
Well, I think there's obviously traditional options. Oh, sorry, John.
Okay, sorry, I haven't, Anne, really, but I just think for the 130 people on the call at the moment, I'd just like to put it on record what a fabulous job APSCo is doing for us members at the moment, and thank you very much. So my answer to your question is APSCo.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for that. All right, let me get on to the next question, which is not one we've had. If someone is about to return back from maternity leave, can we put them straight into furlough? Tania.
I was looking through my guidance. I think you can. You have to comply with all the law around maternity and return to work, etc. But if they're, for example, if their original job that they're entitled to get back to is on furlough, then I think they can come back onto furlough. Yes.
Okay, I'm moving quite quickly on because we've only got 5 minutes. So if it's a question that's been asked before, I might ask you either not ask it or just a one-word answer for this one particularly. Are workers employed through intermediaries eligible for furlough as long as it's PAYE payroll and that they were active on the 28th of February? One-word answer to that, Stuart?
Yes.
Yep, I thought that might be it. Okay. Next question, is there any flexibility to face-to-face registrations for the care or education workers under Compliance Plus? And can we view all documents via video and email? Tania, I know we've been doing some work on this.
Yes, so as I said, the Home Office announced and published yesterday that they are relaxing right to work checks so that they can be done on video link. Strictly, we just need to get the authorization from CCS, Crown Commercial Service, that this now applies and their rules are relaxed, but this is what we've been waiting for. So the answer is that yes, you can treat Compliance Plus regulations as relaxed to the extent that the Home Office right to work checks have been relaxed and video allowed, and to the extent that the DBS checks have been relaxed and video is allowed. So we will get a little note out to Compliance Plus members on that.
What's our time frame from getting that note out, Tania?
Really, it will be quite short. We'll just be pointing Compliance Plus members in the direction of the guidance and confirming, so it will be over the next few days.
Right. Just for anybody who's not in the markets where APSCo have Compliance Plus, it is an audit process that, as the name suggests, goes beyond what compliance looks like, and that's in 2 markets. That is in the social worker market, not social care, but social worker market, where obviously people are, the candidates that are being placed are working with vulnerable individuals, and indeed the education market for exactly the same reason, where there is dictated face-to-face meetings and checks that people are who they say they are to make sure that vulnerable people are safeguarded. So it's called Compliance Plus. We have it in 2 different markets, and anyone that wants to work in those markets really needs to have Compliance Plus to show that they are absolutely safeguarding the customers that they're placing with, and indeed their environments, to make sure they're a safe place for to put candidates into, and the candidates are safe to work in those environments. Okay, let me go on to another question. If somebody is on furlough, can we still invite them to a team webinar drinks to stay in touch with them, or would this not be allowed? John, do you have a view on that?
Definitely. I think you need to think that you still have a duty of care to your employees who you furlough. I've been reading about the mental health. You need to consider that as part of your HR policies that wouldn't be working, and things like WhatsApp chat groups, things like possibly trying to find food vouchers that you might send to your furloughed workers, all of that great stuff.
Okay, great. I'm moving on quickly. An interesting one we haven't had. What if we don't want to use the 2-year holiday accrual use-up period? Can we stick to our company policy of using it all up in 1 year, this year, or lose it? Tania, quick answer to that.
I think it's a statutory requirement that the leave year needs to be extended for statutory holiday leave. So insofar as it's statutory, i.e. 20 days, I don't think you could insist on it being used in a year. Although you have, as I said, got the right to require workers to take holiday at a time suitable to you if you give them notice. So I'm not quite sure how they interrelate. But my gut feeling is no, you just need to accept that they can't lose it. They
Okay,
need to take it in some way.
I'm going to close this session because we're just running out of time with one question that I'm going to give an answer to. What is APSCo's stance on supplier payments, huge CRM and LinkedIn job boards agreements, etc.? Let me give you APSCo's view on this. The recruitment market are part of a whole workforce ecosystem where everybody has to pay their bills. I've been asked to gang up on big suppliers to the recruitment market and speak on behalf of all APSCo members, which I've kind of refused to do, and I'll tell you why. We are asking clients to pay us on time. We are asking organisations to actually play fair with us, and I would find it very difficult and indeed, if I'm not careful, illegal for APSCo to be anti-competitive when making demands on what we perceive to be huge businesses that supply to us. We will come out of this at some stage, utilise the relationships that you have to negotiate on your behalf. But I think it's fair to recognise that where we are suppliers to end user clients, we have suppliers that supply to us. Let's try and be fair and try and make the whole of this workforce supply chain work well with each other, that we can come out of the other side still in business, still safeguarded, and hopefully still friends. Let me close off this session this morning. Thank you to Tania Bowers, Legal Counsel of APSCo, to John Cox, Recruitment Director of CCL Global, and to Stuart Hutchison, Partner of Hacker Young. Let me thank them for their time and sign off until Friday, where at 11 o'clock we will have a new panel again for APSCo members and indeed other colleagues that may want some answers to the questions that they have. We will help you on Friday. Do ask us, join us again at 11 o'clock. Thank you for your time. Stay safe and be careful out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.